Subverting the law to uphold the law. Is this the essence of the Redeemer? Welcome to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. Hello everybody, welcome back to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. I'm theoretical physicist Dr. Shannon Ray, and today's episode was supposed to be a recitation of a poem that I wrote about the crucifixion called You Are a Reflection of God's Spirit, Separation on the Cross. So originally it was supposed to be a recitation and an explanation about that. But after recording the episode and reciting the poem, I realized that the content of the recording didn't really explain or discuss the content of the poem directly. And I feel like the way it originally recorded would have sounded kind of just unexplained and weird. And so I've decided to remove the poem and just keep the main recording. And I will recite the poem and discuss it in a later episode. So this episode is interesting. It's about Jesus as the Redeemer of not only humanity, but also of God, and what that actually means. So if you're interested in hearing what I have to say about that, please enjoy the episode. And for anyone who's listening to this who isn't Christian and isn't particularly interested in religion, try to keep an open mind. Try to give these episodes on Jesus and Christianity that I've been recording lately a chance, because at the very least, what you have in these religions, Buddhism, Christianity, no matter what it is you have a world, you have a reality, you have a set of axioms that construct the world. And at the very least, if you're unfamiliar with that world, by listening to these episodes, you can follow me into the world, like allow me to be your guide, so that you can see why a theoretical physicist would turn to this world and think that it is actually describing ultimate reality. So at the very least, you can listen to this as a curiosity just to see, okay, what do these people think and why? So with that, if you're listening to this on YouTube, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And please share it with a friend if you think they'll find this interesting. And so I hope you enjoy the recording. Peace. I was having a thought today. So I was walking into the house after walking my dog, and I was just thinking about how much lack of compassion I have for people a lot of times. Like, I think my default mode can be very judgmental. And when I say I think, I mean I know. But there's a part of me that goes into a judgmental mode, recognizes it's bad, and then think, okay, you need to do better. You need to have more compassion, as opposed to just directly having more compassion. And I oftentimes, what I'm judging someone for, it's not like they're not legitimately messing up or they're not doing something wrong. I mean, they typically are. But, as a Christian, we're all sinners. We're all doing something wrong. And that's the thing that always pulls me out of that thought. It's just like every time I have it, I think, well, you're no better. You're no better than these people that you're constantly judging. And so I just was thinking about this idea of why can't I be more compassionate? And it always reminds me how I'm not Jesus, and to say not Jesus, to not be Jesus is to not be God. And that's kind of the whole point to the thesis again of the Bible. It's something like, despite people's flaws and their sins and their delusions and their failures, God always loves you. God always loves you. And it's fascinating because when you read the Old Testament, people would feel like, yeah, that doesn't seem to be the case. God always seems to be doling out punishment. Like, I'm reading Ezekiel right now, and like he's just going like, I'm going to destroy them this way. I'm going to do this to them. I'm going to do that to them because of their idols and all the nonsense they're doing. Like, he sounds very angry and judgmental, and he doesn't sound like this all-loving being that is, no matter how much you mess up, he's there, he's coming forward, inviting you into a relationship with him out of love. Like that, I think most people who are especially not Christians who read the Bible probably come away with that impression. But that's the thing about Jesus. When you read Jesus' character, it is the objective nature of a being, of a character who just walks fully with compassion for everybody. And he's just like, it doesn't matter how absurd people are, how ridiculous they are. He's just always moving forward, inviting them into relationship with them, forgiving them, loving them, letting them know that they're loved. And that's one thing that whenever people say Jesus is God, I don't think people really know all the layers in which that is true. And one of those layers is literally in a literary sense. So just say that Jesus is the God from the Old Testament. So in a literary case, it's saying something like that God from the Old Testament that seems all angry and fiery. Yeah, that's Jesus. That Jesus is that God manifested on earth as a person. And that if that God that seems all angry were to be on the earth in a purified form, not through the lens of people, then this is how he would look. And this is why the thing about the Bible that drew me in was just the sheer coherence of it. It's so insanely coherent. It blows my mind. Literally the level of coherence and depth was just made me go, where did this thing come from? And so it's crazy because I'm gonna get to this later. It really does show how Jesus is the Redeemer as well. Like the whole point again to the Bible, you got to understand the thesis of the Bible. If you're not a Christian or you are a Christian, you just want to hear it articulated in the way that I articulate it. Is that the whole point to the Bible is that you have this original sin, and that sin causes a separation between humanity and God, and that there is a need to reconcile that relationship. And so we are people in a fallen state, and we need a savior to reconcile back with God. And so in that sense, we are redeemed. Like Jesus is our redeemer, and he is redeeming us back to God. But the thing is, I think most people wouldn't understand. I don't know how many people say or think this, but he's also the redeemer of God. This is the thing that's really important. And the way to say this without it being heretical, because I think almost any Christian, especially Orthodox, whoever would hear that would think, God doesn't need redeeming. Well, that's heresy, blah, blah, blah. No, no, no. Calm down, calm down. Just let me finish. So when I say that, I mean that the perception of God to humanity is what needs to be redeemed. So, in other words, when you read the Old Testament and you see this God who seems angry and is doling out punishment and is telling them to kill these people and to kill the people and do all those things, this is what God looks like to humanity in its fallen state. Like basically, humanity is in a fallen state, full of sin, and so God. And again, this is like basic Christian theology. He works with sin. God is respecting the created world. And I have another poem thing that I wrote that I might read about this, having to do with fully random numbers. But the whole point is that God must respect the world of the temporal, of this created world, its rules, its logic. Because the thing is that for God, in the realm of God, the realm of heaven, anything is possible. So God's not limited by anything, but if anything is possible, then that means that at any given moment, from one state to the next, you don't necessarily need something like perfect coherence. You know, you have the capacity for infinite randomness from one point to the next. So for the created world to be the created world and not the eternal realm, it needs like a predictability. Because we're down here, it needs a predictability. It doesn't have the capacity for infinite possibility at every given moment. It's created. There's momentum. There's X, Y, one X and Y because of Z. Things. You have time, so you have the past, present, and future. Like this is what you need in a temporal, earthly, created space, and so God has to respect that. And so because of that, whenever we in the created world make decisions that create sin, that create circumstances, then God's like, okay, well, I have to work with this. If you aren't full of sin, then I don't have to work. I don't have to deal with things like this. But because you guys are full of sin and I have to respect your decisions and create judgments that are consistent with my character and all these things, then then I have to allow you to actually make decisions because you're made in his image. You are, and this is another thing that's important about the thesis of the Bible is that you are like his partners in creation. Like he wants a relationship with you and he wants your will and his will to align. And so that you are like his manifestation creating together with him. And so the less you're fallen, the less you are functioning out of sin, the less God has to work with sin to approach us, to come into relationship. And so because of that, for the people who are mired in sin, what does God appear to them? What does he look like to them? In other words, when the fall happens and Adam and Eve are suddenly afraid to be seen naked in front of God, and they're hiding, they're afraid of him. They're afraid of him now. They weren't afraid of him, and now they are. That's the nature of the original sin, the split. And so because of that, our perception of God is filled with fear. And we're able to take the position of the accuser, of accusing God. Look at this created world. How could God have created a world that has this nature of suffering in it? Why did he create this world? And so when you are in the world that has sin in it, then you can take the satanic position of accusing God, becoming resentful, hating God. Then this is the problem of evil. Why does evil exist? And that's what we're touching on. So what I'm saying is that Jesus is the Redeemer of God in that he redeems our perception of God, our relationship with God. And one way that really helped me put this in perspective is there's a Buddhist sutra where it's an interesting sutra because I'll see if I can look it up and find it and put the link in the description, the blue Buddha again. But in the sutra, it's funny because the sutra is a bunch of Buddhas and bodhisattvas and stuff like that in assembly, and they're just listing off all these different like bodhisattvas. Bodhisattva with with left hand raised, bodhisattva with slight smile, bodhisattva with big smile, and it's like all of these little intricate differences. It's just kind of funny about like the sutra. But at some point in time, I don't know if it's a bodhisattva or a somebody asked the Buddha a question, and they're looking at the world, and the world has thorns and it looks all nasty and terrible, and the Buddha's like, I've purified this land, and someone's like, this land doesn't look purified, it looks like crap. Like, what are you talking about? And so the Buddha takes his big toe and he sticks it into the earth, and suddenly everything is perfectly purified and clear and beautiful. And the guy's like, oh, this is perfect. He's like, and Buddha's like, yeah, it was always this way. The only reason why you didn't think that is because of your own perception. Like, it's purified. You just don't know it. So that sutra, along with reading the Bible, that just kind of puts that in perspective, that the nature of the divine and of God and this reality that we live in, whether or not it seems purified and loving, it depends on your perception. And so in the Bible, when you have God doing things like commanding these people to be killed or commanding that person to be killed, or asking Abraham to kill Isaac, or asking Jesus to be murdered and slaughtered and humiliated. And like most atheists, they hear this like, oh, what a terrible God. What an evil God. He needs a sacrifice. And so I think I heard Christopher Hitchens say the exact thing. He needs a sacrifice. He needs to take an innocent thing and sacrifice it so he can be satisfied. What an evil. And that's the thing, like I said in my previous episodes, the nature of sin is that it kills innocence. Like that's that's part of it. And so why am I saying all this? Yeah, it comes down to the fact that Jesus as God is a reviving of God. And this is something I talked with Dario about extensively. So I've had some very interesting conversations with Dario. And for Dario, God is frightening because he has this infinite capacity for redemption. And I love the example he used. He used an example, and it was in my episode with him. So if you go back and listen to my episode with Dario in it, Lacan baptism and something else, he articulates this. But he's saying, like, imagine you have a woman who's in a situation where there's a depraved man who is going to harm her children, and this depraved man is the sheriff, so she can't go to any authority. There's no one she can reach out to, and she knows that when this man shows up again, he's going to do some unspeakable harm to her children. And so as a helpless mother, her role as a mother is to take care of her children. And so because she cannot defend her children, she can't do that role, she has to do the most subversive thing as a mother, which is to take the life of her children. Like if someone, like if you knew that some murderer was going to come and like do awful things to your kids and there's nothing you can do about it, and you knew for a fact that was going to happen, the most merciful thing to do might be to kill your children. And so in that, it's a subverting of the moral law to uphold the moral law. And so what made Dario so in awe is that God has an infinite capacity of redemption. So only God is the one who's in the position who can do things that look like subversion of the moral law to uphold the moral law. And one thing Dario pointed out is that once a person starts to see them, puts themselves in that position where they think that they can take this role that God has, which is this subverting the moral law in this way, it's like you start going down levels of pure sanity because you can justify so much evil and and think yourself righteous for it. And he's like, that's just absolute pure madness. And so the thing about what Jesus does is that because in this literary sense, he is God of the Old Testament, like as Christians, we just take that as an axiom. And so now the God of the Old Testament comes down to earth and allows himself to be humiliated, murdered, and beaten for our sake. And by doing so, redeeming the image of God in the eyes of man. It's insane when you look at the nature of the story. And when I say it's insane, I mean the complexity of all of it is just it's so absolutely fascinating. From an intellectual basis, Christianity is you could spend an eternity just loving it for its pure, coherent intellectual depth, philosophical depth, spiritual depth, ethical depth. It's insane. Literary depth. So you have Jesus as the Redeemer in the absolute sense. He's redeeming the image of God in the eyes of man, and he's redeeming men to God. And that's the whole point, is that as a Christian, when you see Jesus as God, and you see God humbling himself in this way, it's basically saying something like, look, I'm God. I am all love. I am all compassion. I am exactly that. I love you with all my heart. I completely love you, and I want a relationship with you. I am exactly that. But you don't see me that way. You don't see me that way. You, in your heart, have the satanic position. You accuse me. You accuse me of being evil. And so, in this, I truly am innocent. In other words, it's something like looking at the woman who kills her children and calling her an immoral monster. And you're like, well, it's due to the sin of the man she's defending her children from. Like, that guy is possessed by a demon. Like, he's evil. Like, how can you judge this woman for making this decision? She's innocent. And so you have to think of God as being that. He's like, look, I'm innocent. He like, just using this as a analogy from content from this episode, he is the purified land that looks like it has thorns. He's totally innocent. And he was innocent during the fall. Like, he's totally innocent. And so coming onto the earth as a human with his purity, authority, and power in full display, and then choosing to allow himself to be humbled, it's almost like he's saying, you guys are the ones who demand justice. You are in the position of the accuser. You're accusing me. So I'm going to come down. I'm going to give the justice that you demand. But what you're going to see is that I am fully innocent. And this is what I always keep trying to say about the nature of sin, is that go back to my episode on devs and Christian ethic or Christian forgiveness. Go back and listen to that episode where I talk about the idea of a guy who's going around stealing from people's houses, and then you catch him stealing in your house. So he knows that you're going to report him, and so he frames you. And now you're on trial for his crimes, and you're in jail for his crimes. You're found guilty, and you're in jail for his crimes. And you're just like, I hate this effing guy. The natural next response for you is pure hatred and desire for justice. And imagine instead in that moment after you're sitting in jail, you're just like, I'm praying for this guy. I can't believe that his heart is so broken that he would do this. God, please. And you start praying for him, and you just want love and forgiveness. And you know what I mean? Like, that's not normal. That is a discontinuity. That requires you to be in control. Not your emotions, not your feelings, not your desire for justice. Like, you have to be in control to pull that off. And so for us, we need this desire for justice. And so God comes on earth and sacrifices himself. And the whole point is that you recognize, like, oh my goodness, I killed innocents. I'm the one that's responsible. I'm the one that's responsible. I'm the one that's killing innocents. Because once you get your need for justice fed and you recognize, oh no, God was totally innocent the entire time. Now and then not only that, but he's still like, yep, I did this for you. I love you. I forgive you. Then you're just like, I don't deserve this. And then that's when you're like on the ground crying that why what's so special about me? I don't deserve this forgiveness. And Jordan Peterson always talks about the part in Exodus where the Israelites are being tormented by snakes, and God tells Moses to put the snake on a stick and make them look at it, and those who look at it will be healed. And Jesus also says that he will be like the snake being put up on the cross, and he's going to function as a snake from Exodus, that if you look at him, you will be healed. And then talking with Ryan, and he talks about how like the idea of Jungian psychoanalysis and the idea of of incorporating your shadow. And the idea is that when you act out of the space of your shadow and you're not aware of what you're doing, it has control over your behavior because of your fear or inability to look at it sincerely, to know who you are and what's really motivating you. When you're in that state, when you're unable to look at your shadow, you can be in a state of delusion where you're blaming others. Think of someone who's constantly blaming others for their problems, never taking responsibility for themselves, judging others for the exact same thing they do. But then when they actually have to look back at themselves, they have to be like, oh, all that judgment I was imposing on others, I have to impose on me, all these things that I've said a million times in the podcast. So when you're functioning out of that mode, you're constantly doing things that harm people, or you put yourself in situations that makes you ask, why am I here again? And it's almost like you're intentionally putting yourself in situations to force yourself to look at that thing you don't want to look at. And then once you look at it and you're able to comprehend it and incorporate it into yourself. So you look at all of this, and this is again, this level of coherence. Like you look at the psychological nature of this idea of looking at the way in which you are not innocent, the way that you are responsible. And that's essentially what Jesus' crucifixion is. It's something like being forced to look at the sinful, satanic nature within your heart and knowing that God loves you and forgives you anyway. And so that's why like this whole little ramble started from the idea. It's just like, man, I'm not compassionate enough. And I was watching some near death experience videos on YouTube recently, and that was one of the things that I kept coming across, this idea that in your life review, there's this idea that there are all these opportunities to be more compassionate. And so I've been really focused on like, man, how many times do I have an opportunity to be more compassionate and I'm not? How many times am I sitting there in judgment of other people? And it's just like, man. And then I think about the idea of like, man, I know I'm not perfect, and I know I've done a lot of crappy things, and I have a lot of sins that I need forgiving. And it's just like, I can't believe that when I die, I'll be clothed with Jesus, and Jesus will love me anyway and show me the compassion that I have so much trouble showing other people, because I'm not Jesus. I'm a sinful, flawed person. And the more I can be like Jesus, the more I can have that compassion, because he is just so compassionate. It's just crazy. Yeah, so from a literary sense, he is the spirit of compassion, love, ethics personified. And that's another thing too that shows that he's God, is just his sheer capacity to not need justification. Like when people are accusing him, like, yeah, it's as you say. He just doesn't even try to defend himself. Like, Because you all know that if someone's functioning out of sin or delusion, that trying to like justify yourself or defend yourself with words, that don't help. All it does is give them more fodder to take your words, distort them, and accuse you. Because the whole thing is like, if someone's falsely accusing you of something and you defend yourself, then you're saying you're a liar, you're wrong. And so now you're pointing your finger back at them, which just gives them more capacity to be like, to use your defense of yourself against you to justify their own position. And so imagine someone's teasing you, or someone's teasing you or mocking you. If you respond in rage and you hit them and stuff like that, everyone knows that it's like you're not in control. The person's words are in control. They're controlling you. You're not in control. But someone who can infinitely take whatever abuse someone says verbally is, and they don't respond to it, then it's like, okay, that person's in control. And so that's, again, it's like showing this ultimate humility in this ability to humble yourself. And even though you have the power and authority to prevent it, you do nothing and just allow them to play out this ritual so that they can see this own sin in their hearts, and thus redeeming God. And that's the whole point too, again, about the Christian theology. It's just the idea of the law as it's written down versus the law as it's written in your heart. And I was reading Ezekiel recently in my Bible study with Nathan and a couple of my Jewish friends. And at the beginning of Ezekiel, God comes down to Ezekiel and writes his words on a scroll, and then Ezekiel eats them, and it tastes like honey. So the idea of the law being written in your heart as opposed to written down on scrolls or a piece of paper and you just follow rules, that's the whole point with Jesus. Again, go back to John 17, where Jesus is praying for us to be one with the Father as he's one with the Father, and for everyone to be inside of each other and be one with each other. The whole point is that by making Jesus Lord and following him and doing what he commands and what he says, by doing so, you are repenting and aligning your will with God's will. And so the whole point of why I'm saying this is because it's the living word. It's the idea of the living word. A set of rules written down on a piece of paper is dead. Another thing I used to talk about with Dario. It's almost like, think of it this way. Think of the reason why organizations get bogged down with bureaucracy and stop being efficient and stop functioning properly. Whether it be academia, whether it be something in industry, whether it be the government of a country, whatever it is, once you put down structure and rules and all these things, once you put that stuff down, it almost becomes like a monolithic structure that you'd have to break down and rebuild. Like, imagine having to break down and rebuild all the time. It's easier for the structure to just become stagnant. So when a structure becomes stagnant, it stops being useful. It's not alive. It's not alive. And so you need some way, and this is the whole point of deconstruction. This is the liberal spirit's role. This is the part of reviving, is that you need some way to be able to break rules and tear them down to honor the rules. This structure, this rule was created with the purpose of creating a particular spirit, a particular mode of being. It had a principle. It had something that was trying to be manifested on earth. Something that was supposed to be manifested. That's the spirit of the reason. Like, that's the spirit of the structure. And so you want to find a way to tear down the structure so that you can honor the structure. You know, there's a certain point where the structure becomes dead and no longer functions, does its function, especially as dynamics and things change. Go back to our episode, Liberals and Conservatives. You know, you need some method to break things down and build them back up. Otherwise, you're dead. Again, this is why it's the eternal. This is why it's the nature of God. Like, this nature of death by structure, death by the masculine, death by freezing, needing to be thawed or taken down by the feminine or the liberal spirit. These things have to be in harmony with each other. So then this is why you need revolution. This is why you need the liberal spirit. You need something to tear down structure. And this can be subversive. So you need some sort of subversive structure so that something can maintain its spirit, its life. And again, go back to what I was saying in this episode, the idea of subverting the moral law to uphold the moral law. This idea of subverting the rules to uphold the rules. And so what you have in Jesus is a being, a character, a person, depending on what lens you are looking at this from, that is subverting the law. And that's the reason why people are like wanting to hang him, you know, or wanting to kill him and stuff. Like, he's teaching things in a way that seems like the subverting law to uphold it. And then by doing so, removing the covenant with God that comes from the law to moving it to a covenant with God that's within your heart. And now this thing is always alive. because you're not asking yourself under every situation, what does the law say? And I've listened to like Ash May's and Radar Apologetics in a conversation with Jewish people who are so trying to maintain the law. Actually, it wasn't Radar. It was Ash May, and this I think it's called a Karaite Jew, someone who only is a Torah only Jew. And so the guy who's a Torah only Jew, I think his name is Israel, was talking with Orthodox Jew, and so the Karaite Jew was trying to explain like how to keep the Sabbath. And the Orthodox Jew was like, how do you know how to keep the Sabbath though? It's without some sort of rule telling you exactly how to do this or exactly how to rest it, then how do you know how to keep the Sabbath? And he's trying to say, well, it was like, well, the Torah has words, like you have to, there's some degree to which you have to have some sort of comprehension of words, and then you do your best. But the point between that dynamic was that one of them was so reliant on structure to tell him what to do as opposed to listening to his heart. And that's the whole point about making Jesus Lord, is that Jesus becomes your conscience. He becomes your example. And so something Nathan always says is that you have to be acting out of faith. Anything that's not acted out of faith is not what you should be doing. So what that means is something like, you have to be asking yourself at any moment what you're doing, okay, what would Jesus do? That idea. But furthermore, it's like, is this an honoring of God? Am I doing this for God? Am I doing this such that I'm having a clear conscience with God, or do I feel myself trying to justify this action? Once you feel yourself trying to justify the action, then you're probably not doing it out of faith, and so you should probably not do it. Not that you need some sort of rule to tell you that. That should be in your heart. And so once you are acting out of faith in this way, by making Jesus Lord, then you are able to create in a way such that what you create is aligned with God's will. That's the whole point of repentance. You see how this all works. It fits so perfectly, like a perfect little like machine. Everything, every cog at a place, every rod, everything is working just like a perfect machine in Christian theology. At least to me, like it's absolutely brilliant. And so in this way, it's like Jesus functions as this infinite redeemer of God by making him God and having him give the example of this full humility and it's like, okay, well, you're accusing me. You're taking the satanic position. Fine. Do what you have to do. I'm God. I'm gonna let you do what you have to do. If you think that's what you need, then here you go. And then once you see like, oh, whoa, actually God was totally innocent, then it's like, okay, so now this compassion that you've been given, now you have to go and give that to other people. This is the brilliance of the parable of the servant whose debt was forgiven. I think it's in Matthew. I wish I had my Bible with me and I'll just read it directly. But there's a parable in the Bible, and I remember actually listening to this when I was a kid and when I was a Christian growing up. There was a king. I'm pretty sure it was a king and a servant who had like this insane debt to the king. And so he's brought before the king and he's like begging the king. I think the king was going to like sell his wife and him into slavery or something like that to pay back the debt or something. And so the guy's like, oh, please, please, please forgive me my debt, please. And so the king's like, okay, I'm going to have compassion and mercy on you. I'm going to forgive you of your debt. And then like this servant goes to someone else who owes him money. Like I think one of his servants or something like that. And the guy has a much smaller debt. Like this other servant, so the servant whose debt was relieved by the king, he goes to his servant or someone who owes him money, and the amount of money this person owes him is far less than what he owed the king. And then the guy's like, I don't have your money. And he's like, oh, I'm going to throw the whole book at you and try to get you thrown into prison with absolutely no forgiveness whatsoever. And Jesus, like, and that the whole point is like, in this instance, Jesus is the king. And then we, as Christians, are that servant whose debt has been forgiven. And then when we go out into the world and judge other people and don't have compassion for them, then we are that servant. It's like, no, you were forgiven, so you have to go forgive other people. Like, you can't be going around demanding justice and all this stuff. You need to have more compassion. And this is how this works. It fits so perfectly. The Bible is brilliant. I remember seeing something recently about like God or Jesus reveals himself to you in many different ways, and he just revealed himself to me through my intellect, I'm pretty sure. He was just like, isn't this brilliant? I'm like, yes, it is brilliant. Okay. So let's finish this off.